Welcome, good afternoon. I'll call this Housing Finance and Policy Committee to order. And note that we do have a quorum present now, just barely. We got to get some folks coming in. I think some committees are running late. Before we move on to business, something I forgot to do at our last meeting, and just because we have so much work to do, I just want to introduce some of our new housing staff this year. First, we have Jonathan Smith, our new CLA. I wonder if you just quick introduce yourself to the committee.
Hey folks, Jonathan Smith, happy to be here.
And we have a new Republican CA, Lori Kozlowski, sorry. Yeah.
Hi everybody, Lori Kozlowski, GOP CA, so thanks.
And I'm wondering if we have our House pages, if they would stand up and just recognize themselves quick. Yeah. Thank you, folks. And with that, I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes from Tuesday, February 24th. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Representative Rehauer moves the minutes. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. The minutes are approved. Members, we have 3 bills up today, but first we have some presentations as we continue to get ourselves grounded in the state of housing here in Minnesota. We had some of those yesterday and another one today. A presentation from the Minnesota Housing Partnership. And so I'm happy to welcome Ann Mavity, Executive Director of Minnesota Housing Partnership, back to the committee. Thanks for being here, and we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you so much, Chair Howard, Co-Chair Igo, and members of the committee. We are delighted to be here today. My name is Ann Mavity, and I'm the Executive Director of Minnesota Housing Partnership. We are a nonprofit that drives housing solutions through original research. We strengthen local community development both across Minnesota in rural communities and with tribal partners, and also do that nationwide. And then we advocate for policies that ensures that everyone has a home. I'm here today with my colleague, our policy manager, Courtney Schaff, and I assure you she's the one to go to for all your questions following this hearing. Thank you. So today I'm going to share a lot of information with you. I've given a packet of these slides that you have right now. I'm not going to go through every single one, but it's sort of the basic information to understand what's happening in housing across Minnesota. In Minnesota right now, there's 3 things to remember. 1, we don't have enough homes for everyone who needs them. 2, people are paying more than they can afford for homes, which is squeezing the family budgets. And lots of folks are now at risk of losing their homes because of evictions and an inability to pay. And the 3rd is that we don't have sufficient resources. We have great solutions, but we don't have sufficient resources to actually fund those solutions. So we need more housing of every type in every corner of the state. You've seen this slide many times, probably. We are behind in production because of the 2006-07 recession, and we still haven't caught up. One of the things that we look at as a leading indicator about what's to come in the future is looking at building permits. This slide is using the St. Louis Federal Reserve and looks at what are building permits happening, and that tells us what units are going to be online in another couple years into the future. And what we're seeing is a downward trend in building permits. That makes it very hard because we won't see as many homes in the next couple years following that than we would want. Similarly, we have data on the apartment supply outlook. You can see at the end, the projections are a precipitous drop in production. We need more housing. And the thing is that Minnesota, we have goals to create more housing. Back in 2018, maybe some of you were on the Minnesota Housing Task Force. We set out a goal of 300,000 homes for the state of Minnesota by 2030. Similarly, cities are having goals themselves. The Met Council has a 7-county focus where they set goals for each 10-year time period. In the last 10-year time period, Met Council that ended in 2020, Met Council said, let's create 36,000 new affordable homes. The problem with all of these goals is that we're not reaching them. So we only met 44% of that goal back in 2020. So we wanted 36,000 affordable homes. The region produced 16,000. That's a gap of 20,000. And that is happening year over year over year. So not only are we not increasing our supply, we're not even keeping up with what we need for basic population growth. So I'm going to jump ahead a little bit because what that really means is that this supply and demand is resulting in having the hardest impact on our lowest income families. So in fact, we have only 39 rental homes that are affordable and available for every 100 extremely low-income Minnesota households. That squeeze is happening. It's what you're probably hearing on the doors and from your constituents because we do not have enough homes for everyone in Minnesota. In fact, we're 100,000 homes short. Now, the good news is we have some strategies and solutions that you'll hear about this session to address some of those. And one of those is the Yes to Homes legislation, which is a direct response saying we're not getting the outcomes from our current processes that we need to see in the marketplace to create more homes. What can we change? How can we improve that? So we're looking at legislation that will create more homes and housing choices in places where cities choose and that makes the most sense. But we have to do something different if we want a different outcome. So the second thing then I really want to talk about, in addition to the supply of homes that we need, is helping people afford their homes. What we know is that there's a gap between what housing costs and what people can afford. Rental assistance is one of the most simple and elegant ways we can make sure to bridge that gap. Again, the challenge is that on the federal side, we are budget constrained with our rental assistance programs, so that of every only 3 out of 4 households that are eligible for rental assistance don't get it. Only 1 of those households does. And just in contrast, for those of us who are homeowners like I am, I don't have to rush to file my taxes every year because I know that I'll get my mortgage interest deduction, but there's no budget limit to that. But there is a budget limit to rental assistance. So while there's federal assistance flowing to all kinds of households, that's where the pinch is happening. You have in your packets, Minnesota Housing Partnership provides data to help inform both what's happening in your district and across Minnesota. So we have the state housing profile for Minnesota, but in each of your packets, we've provided you data and information specifically about your own districts as well. So one of the things that we see, this is in Minnesota, you'll have district-specific information, but one of the things we track are what are the most in-demand jobs that are being created in Minnesota that the market needs. And of those jobs, then we track that and say, can these jobs, do the salaries these jobs pay, can they afford an average 2-bedroom apartment? And can they afford an average home, and a median-priced home? And what we're seeing is that that's just not happening. Even with nurses, which typically have been able to afford home ownership, that's just barely is still within reach for those. So those income versus housing costs continues to be a challenge. And of course, what we see of that is that we have rent burdens. We have rent burdens across Minnesota. In fact, half of all renters in Minnesota are paying more than they can afford for their housing. And that means we judge that by a 30%. If 30% of your income is for housing, you have enough to pay for all those other things in your life. What we know is that half of the folks are paying more than they can afford. And that's happening in every community across Minnesota. So even on this map of Minnesota by county, the white counties are still tracking that 25% of the population are paying more than they can afford. And in those counties that are dark red, that goes up to 50% of the renters are paying more than they can afford for housing. So this is happening in every corner of our state, and something that collectively is important that we keep our eye on and help address. As we talk about rental assistance, we also need to think about what's right in front of us. And emergency rental assistance is one of the tools that helps keep people from being evicted, from losing their housing. Once someone loses their housing, the cycles, the costs, both to the individual and frankly to the systems, increase exponentially. So keeping folks stably housed is our goal and a strategy. What we see in Minnesota compared to the other communities across the country, 10 states and different communities, that even compared to pre-pandemic numbers, Minnesota is trending higher on evictions than other communities. And so that's a challenge, both because we want to make sure, again, we have stable communities and stable families, and we need assistance to do that. I'll touch briefly on home ownership now. I know I'm going through these fast, but I'll take questions at the end. I want to touch briefly on home ownership just to say that there's some good news and some challenging news. So the average home in Minnesota now costs more than $400,000. And I'm old. That's not what my first home cost. And that makes home ownership out of reach for so many households, especially these younger households that are trying to start families and such. And what that's resulted in is that the average first-time homeowner now is 40 years old. So I don't know if you all are homeowners or when you became homeowners, but now the average is 40 years old because those costs between income and housing are stretched so far. And we continue to see racial disparities in home ownership rates in Minnesota as well. You can see some trends that ticked up in the last couple years. A lot of resources and strategies were invested specifically to make sure that everyone had access to home ownership and were really targeted in helpful ways. But it's something we need to keep our eye on as we see that trend ticking downward now. So I think you're going to hear more about this afternoon. I won't talk too much. If we want to have this vibrant housing availability and choice for everyone, we need to have a very healthy housing sector. The providers themselves need to have the resources, the apartment buildings and developments need to be resourced well too. And these costs that we see with property insurance going up and other kinds of increases in these costs are really squeezing the whole sector in their ability to deliver year over year over year on preserving and stabilizing the housing that is already in existence. Housing infrastructure bonds, best tool. It's not very sexy, but it is our workhorse funding to target our very lowest income folks. And I know that's not directly this committee, but we're all interested in it. And then I just want to say that we have more capacity broadly to create housing. There's more applications that get submitted to Minnesota Housing each year. We have more capacity to actually deliver housing than we have resources. And we've seen some really great success lately. The state housing tax credit, which opened up on Monday or Monday last week, I can't remember, it opened up at 8 a.m. and it closed 2 hours later because it was oversubscribed. So we know that there's a hunger for this kind of tool to get dedicated revenue for housing so that we can really supercharge these solutions that we know work. So sorry I went a little over. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Are there any questions from members? Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Chair Howard. Thank you for the presentation. I was just going through here, and I just was wondering, is there any way we can, because I know it's very generic as far as Minnesota, and as I look at this report, you know, as far as building permits down and trending down and stuff like that, I sit down with my city. I'm out in Washington County. We're one of the more expensive ones, but we're growing huge. And in Cottage Grove, they are putting in homes left and right. They are putting in market rate apartments left and right. So I just was wondering if we could find, you know, get more of an idea of what counties are doing what cities are experiencing the issue. I'm assuming some cities have grown out to the point Cottage Grove could double easily and is doing that. Looking at one of the biggest developments in the whole Twin Cities. But what I've also, so if we could get that, and the other question is the other thing that's been interesting as far as you said the reduction of apartments. And I talked to, last night we had a event with some construction companies that make apartments. And before that I met with multi-housing, and they said The difference is Minnesota has become essentially uninvestable for market rate apartments. A lot of that had to be that things got pulled back out of Minneapolis, and St. Paul used to do quite a few, and they're not doing any there. They're still investing in other parts, and they said it hurt them because they were doing like 50,000, and now they're down to 20,000, these companies, so they're definitely feeling it. So, you know, it'd just be interesting to get the numbers back, you know, what are we doing that all of a sudden are not, Minnesota is not building apartments. They said the only thing that's still hot in Minnesota is affordable apartments, where you mentioned that you can get the support, and those only go in if they get the money that's left in the bonding or the different HUD programs and stuff like that. So I think it just, to me, sorry I'm rambling, but I'd just like to know more of a detailed, which communities are feeling what, because like I said, my area is hot. Who's not and why, what's happening, so.
Ms. Mavety?
Chair Howard, what I would say is, yes, thank you, Representative Johnson. So thank you for asking. MHP does have on our website, just like we've put in your packet of legislative district housing profile to
I
give
got
some
that.
detail. We also do county profiles, housing profiles on our website that can be accessed as well. And of course, all that data can be tracked by county or whatever geography, as long as there's enough data within that geography to do that. So, and it is true, some places are hot and some are not. So we're seeing different patterns of that. You'd also asked about like the development environment. And it is absolutely true that we need to make sure that we have a welcoming environment across Minnesota to allow and facilitate for the creation of new housing. And that includes the investment community, making sure that this is a welcome investing arena for them as well. And some of the work that I noted before on the land use and zoning, the regulations and such, we need to make it streamlined and simple enough to create the housing and not have that take years and years and years and getting caught up in too many regulations. So we think that we have some solutions in that direction, absolutely, because 95% of the housing we have is produced by the market. So we need to make sure that we are being supportive of that, even as we know we need to target for the very low income as well.
Thank you.
Representative Dodseth?
Thank you, Chair Howard. I'd like to thank the presenters for this packet of information. It's very helpful. I'm going to just kind of load it up with a few questions and then and some comments as we move forward here. You mentioned that we've got half of the individuals are paying more in rent than what should be. I'm just curious with that, are there some factors that you put into place to gather that information? With that said, I see that there's a lot of redundancy in different programs that are out there. Is there a way that we can get a one-stop shop to actually start directing people to just one place to start gathering their information for assistance for rent, for assistance for housing, et cetera? With that, you also said that there's, the average age has gone, for purchasing homes has gone up to, I believe it was 40 years old, correct? With that, are you finding that maybe people are choosing to start their families later and other factors that might be directing that decision as well, that pushes their decision to purchase a home out to that age differently?
Ms. Mavety?
A lot of questions
Yeah.
in there. Let me take the last one first. The information on the average median home price, as well as the age, the average age of a first-time home buyer being 40 years old, comes from the Minnesota Realtors. And so they're tracking that data. So what goes behind that might be more of a psychological study, but I will just say by the numbers, the income to housing costs that were true when I was 30 years old are different for 30-year-olds today in terms of those housing costs being way out of whack with what that ratio to income would be. So those ratios have changed over time. We can certainly help track that down for you to demonstrate that. So there may be other factors as well, but certainly just by that ratio of income to housing costs has widened over these years. I'm not quite sure, maybe we can follow up on some program redundancies that you asked for. What I would say is that while there are, In many ways, it's very simple that Minnesotans need a home. But homes are also very unique to what each household, what each community, what time of your life you're in, what that is, means that part of what we're trying to support is housing choice and make sure that folks have housing choice for whatever is appropriate. That also means that some of that housing, it's not a one-size-fits-all for everything, including some of the programs of assistance. Again, rental assistance is one of the more elegant and simple delivery models to help bridge that gap. And we do have a good system for providing that with public housing authorities, HRAs across the state.
Representative Dodseth, anything further?
That's it.
Representative Rayrower.
Thank you, Chair. I want to follow up on Representative Johnson's question. Do you think that local zoning and ordinances could have an effect on where there's, which area is more hot on development and which isn't?
Ms. Mavety.
Chair Howard, Representative Rayrower. So yes, absolutely. Pew Research has done some research specifically on Minneapolis and on what some of the changes that Minneapolis did, how that impacted their costs. One of the things that was tracked was that the rate of homelessness within Minneapolis went up at a much smaller rate than the surrounding area, and some of that was due to the ability to increase housing as some of those zoning and land use things were changed. When we look around the country, in areas like Florida that has allowed multifamily in commercial areas and has really been able to deliver enough housing for everyone as well, that we can see that they're delivering much more housing than we have been able to. So in the Homes for All legislation that has been, improved each year as we have learned more in these conversations, and with cities as well, is trying to provide both the choice for cities, but also have some of that data-driven solutions that we have seen across the country and other communities as well, to be included in it.
Co-Chair Igo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Ms. Mavety and team, for being here today. I guess I want to start with some comments. First off, thank you for the individual snapshot of my district. And I have to do a little bragging first because every single one of those top 5 jobs hit the 2-bedroom apartment goal, which I want to give a lot of credit to folks like the Itasca County HRA, Hibbing HRA, because it's their hard work that got us to that point. There's more work to get there, and that's what our Yes to Homes language is working on, is accomplishing that goal. But I had to give credit back to my district for getting those numbers there so people can afford homes. But I wanted to go back to one of the first slides that you presented where you talked about, it's titled, "There Are Not Enough Homes." And it was the decreasing line on housing units needed for household growth and replacement. And I agree with everything there, right? And it's all good. But one of the things that I want to, dive into a little bit is that's a downward decline on homes needed. And I think the Minnesota that we all want is we want to see that line going up. So what kind of factors do we need to do to make that line go up? And I think I have some of the thoughts, but I want to hear from you guys first.
Ms. Mavety.
Chair Howard, Co-Chair Igo. What I would say, if you're asking about the line on population growth, that is probably outside my expertise. And I would punt that to other folks that are really looking at how do we create an environment that brings in jobs and businesses and all the things we need to be thriving, as well as the workers that go with the jobs and the businesses. So that might be for more targeted to a different committee as well. What I would say is that we do need to make sure, and what that is showing is that we continue to have this gap of housing, that we're not going to attract that workforce. We're not going to attract those businesses who want to expand here if we can't deliver on the housing for that workforce.
Co-Chair Igo.
Thank you for that answer. And like I said, I agree. And I think that's something that it's kind of like what I talked about yesterday when I had the gavel, that we need to look at housing as an all-encompassing goal, because that in itself, seeing that line on a downward decline, should be the alarm for all of us that we need to look outside this committee to do factors that make Minnesota grow. You know, that's everything from tax policy, energy policy, things way outside the purview of this committee. But I think the goal of this housing committee, at the end of the day, whether you're Republican or Democrat, is to get that line going up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Mavety, I don't see any other questions. Thank you so much for the information. As always, very much appreciate it. Next on the agenda, we have a presentation on supportive housing in Minnesota, which will tee up one of our bills today. And presenting will be Christine Davis with Hearth Connection and Ann Smetek with Housing Justice Center. As you're getting set up, I'll just welcome you both to the committee.
Thank you very much, Chair Howard. Good afternoon, Chair Howard, Chair Igo, and members of the committee. My name is Christine Davis, and I'm the Executive Director of Hearth Connection, a St. Paul-based nonprofit that works statewide to strengthen Minnesota's supportive housing community and advance long-term solutions to homelessness. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. My goal is to provide a picture of Minnesota's homeless response system, the federal infrastructure that sustains it, and the role of supportive housing as a proven long-term solution to ending homelessness. As background, I bring 25 years of experience administering housing programs, both in nonprofit organizations using federal, state, and local resources, and 10 years in state government working closely with multiple agencies. What I want to convey today is that Minnesota's homeless response system is not a single program. It is a network that spans multiple sectors: federal, state, tribal, county, city governments, nonprofits, healthcare systems, philanthropy, financial institutions, and private investment. Over the past 2 decades, these partnerships built a significant and effective portfolio of programs that responded to community need and resulted in making significant gains in housing stability for thousands of individuals and families. On a single night in January 2025, a federal point-in-time count found nearly 8,400 Minnesotans experiencing homelessness. The most recent 2023 statewide survey by the Wilder Research Center found 10,522 people experiencing homelessness on a single night, and families with children made up nearly half. In order to end homelessness, we need to have emergency response for people living outside in encampments, other places not meant for habitation. But we can't end homelessness with emergency response alone. For people living with chronic medical conditions or disabilities, for many who cycle through emergency rooms, inpatient facilities, and institutions, there must be a stable, service-enriched housing option to move into afterwards. The what next? Behind these numbers, we need a system designed not only to respond to crisis, but to move people toward lasting housing stability. Our current homeless response framework began in 1994 when the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, created continuums of care, COCs, to coordinate local homeless response systems and distribute federal McKinney-Vento homeless assistance funds, the largest federal funding source for homeless assistance. You can see on the slide and in your packet that today Minnesota has 10 continuum of care regions covering the entire state. These regions collectively rank and submit applications for nearly 200 projects. How are those projects chosen? These federal grants undergo multiple layers of oversight before funds are awarded. In Minnesota, projects are first locally reviewed and ranked by multi-sector committees. Then they are federally evaluated, reviewed, approved, and contracted by HUD. Selection is performance-based and continuously monitored. At each level of review, projects must demonstrate strong outcomes, sound financial management, compliance, and data quality to receive and retain funding. In fiscal year 2024, nearly $50 million in HUD COC funding was awarded across Minnesota to support over 5,400 people in more than 3,000 housing units statewide. In your packet, you'll see a detailed list with the awards listed by region. Many of these projects have been funded for years across multiple federal administrations and are part of complex financing structures that also include state and local funding, private lending, investor commitments. These long-term investments built much of Minnesota's supportive housing portfolio over the last 20 years. HUD COC funding supports several housing models, each designed for different levels of need. The first, transitional housing, is time-limited housing up to 24 months, where the program holds the lease and provides rental assistance and services to help households transition to longer-term housing. Then we have permanent housing. That's 83% of the awards in Minnesota. Permanent housing is not time-limited. Individuals or families hold their own lease and pay a portion of their income toward rent. Note that permanent doesn't mean people live there forever. It means the amount of care is intended to align with their assessed level of need. And then within permanent housing, we have rapid rehousing, temporary rental assistance and services to help people quickly exit homelessness, stabilize, and then they can remain in their own home when the assistance ends. Then we have permanent supportive housing. Again, this is the largest category of our federal awards. Permanent supportive housing prioritizes people with verified disabilities and histories of chronic or repeated episodes of homelessness. It combines rental assistance with intensive wraparound services like case management, employment support, healthcare coordination, landlord engagement, and tenant education. It can be delivered in a site-based building or through scattered site apartments in the private market. We have both in Minnesota. Permanent supportive housing is one of the most rigorously studied interventions in homeless policy. Research consistently shows that it works and it has results. Note in your packet an evidence brief with examples across the country and citations to their source. With this model, we know that we achieve 80 to 90% housing stability, improved physical and behavioral health, reduced emergency room visits and hospitalizations, reduced incarceration, improved child welfare outcomes, and lower overall public system costs. If emergency services manage a crisis, supportive housing resolves it for those with the highest needs. The homeless response system also relies on critical infrastructure. Like the Homeless Management Information System, or HMIS, that's a database tracking access, outcomes, compliance, and supporting transparency. Coordinated entry, a standardized process to match people to limited housing resources based on need. And system planning and coordination across providers, counties, tribes, state agencies, and community partners. Note that these systems are not optional. Right now, they're required for both federal compliance and built into contracts and performance requirements for state funding, both at Minnesota Housing and DHS, local funding, county and city, and private financing. I'm going to turn things over to my colleague now to share a summary and status report of changes and risks to these federal funds.
Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Chair Howard, Chair Igo, and members of the committee. My name is Ann Smedick. I'm a director and senior counsel with the Housing Justice Center. In previous roles, I was with HUD and Minnesota Housing, and my work focuses on the ways in which government can impact and support the affordable housing system in Minnesota. I'm here to provide an overview of why the continuum of care in Minnesota is facing significant and unexpected financial challenges, and I will then hand it back to Christine. The Continuum of Care program has traditionally been a very stable source of annual federal funding through multiple administrations. In 2024, HUD issued a 2-year funding application, or NOFO, that would cover both fiscal year 24 and fiscal year 25. Projects applied, were reviewed, and were selected by HUD with the expectation that funding would be provided for 2 years. The last 4 months, however, have been tumultuous. In mid-November 2025, weeks before grant renewals for fiscal year 25 were expected, HUD drastically reversed course. HUD rescinded the existing 2-year funding notice and instead announced a new fiscal year 25 funding application process that included significant policy shifts, such as a drastic reduction in the funding available for permanent supportive housing and new priorities that change the type of housing HUD will fund without time for properties to plan and adjust to those shifts. Multiple federal lawsuits have been filed regarding the COC funding and policy shifts, and those are ongoing. HUD was temporarily enjoined from using its new fiscal year 2025 notice of funding for now. This is an issue that is one of nationwide concern. When the THUD, which is the Federal Appropriations Bill for HUD as well as transportation, was enacted on February 3rd of this year, Congress required HUD to renew a small subset of the grants and set out timelines to process applications under a funding application process. The federal courts are now considering which version of a funding application HUD can use to evaluate the fiscal year 25 properties, which will impact what properties could be funded. Meanwhile, while all of that is happening, properties in Minnesota that were relying on a stable source of federal funding for fiscal year 25 are left in limbo while navigating this federal volatility that is outside of their control. Federal grant agreements are expiring, and it is unclear when or if federal funding will be forthcoming for fiscal year 25 for many of the projects. It is also unclear what priorities will be used to select and fund projects. What is clear, however, is that many of these crucial supportive housing developments cannot withstand even a short-term loss of funding, and properties are already experiencing the negative effects of this ongoing uncertainty. There's a long-term conversation to be had about how Minnesota will adjust to the changing priorities of HUD and how best to continue to serve Minnesotans. In the short term, state support is needed to allow existing properties to weather the storm so crucial housing, beds, and services are not lost before Minnesota can navigate the path forward. Thank you, and I'll flip it back to Christine.
So what is at risk? Without the assurance of immediate and continued HUD COC funding, we are already seeing the impact of uncertainty with grants that have expired and have not been renewed or paid. Providers will be forced to reduce services or close programs. Properties financed with layered public and private investments will be destabilized and face compliance risk. Core community response systems will be dismantled. Residents with the highest needs will lose housing. Health and human service systems will face increased demand they are not equipped to absorb. The impact would extend far beyond individual programs, affecting housing stability, public systems, and community health statewide. In Minnesota, a collaboration of community and family foundations, Foundations for Home, stepped forward and established a temporary emergency fund to support delays and cuts for projects to maintain housing stability for residents. But this will only last a couple of months, and we face a funding cliff before the end of this legislative session. Minnesota is not alone facing the need to financially establish a bridge or a transition. Many states are currently making contingency plans to ensure that the hundreds of millions of taxpayer dollars that have been invested into this effective system are not lost, and the families and individuals do not lose their housing this year. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you. And members, we have a bill that's on this exact topic, and so I would ask members just to hold questions if you have them for the presenters as we present the bill.
All right, the first bill on the agenda today is House File 3425. And I'll just note before we begin that we'll have a 2-minute testimony limit, making sure that we get to everybody and have a chance to be heard. So you'll hear the ring at the 2-minute mark, and that just indicates the time is done. And I will next move to Chair Howard. Would you like to move the bill in front of the committee and move that bill be referred to the Committee on Ways and Means?
That is my motion.
So moved. All right, I understand you have the DE1 amendment. Would you briefly describe and move your amendment?
Thank you, Chair Kozlowski. I will move the DE1 amendment to get the bill in the shape I prefer.
All right, Howard moves the DE1 amendment. Chair Howard, is there, members, any discussion to the amendment? All in favor? Say
Aye.
all opposed? The motion prevails and the amendment is adopted. The next amendment on the agenda is the A1, and Co-Chair Igo is authoring the A1 amendment today. Would you briefly describe and move your amendment?
Yes, Coach, Chair Kozlowski. So the A1 amendment in front of us today is just an addition to the end of the bill. It's going to add in some kind of reporting mechanisms, some fraud mechanisms, just to kind of make sure that if we move this bill forward, that it's going to be a clean way that we're going to be able to document and take care of this new process that we're going to be kind of shifting around how agencies use dollars. So it's similar to the amendment that was used in the Senate, but that's basically what the amendment does.
Great, thank you, Co-Chair Igo. And back to Chair Howard. Any thoughts or description on this amendment?
Thank you, Chair Kozlowski and Co-Chair Igo. I support the amendment. I think it's a good amendment and helps us be good stewards of these resources and helps us stay aligned with the Senate. So I'd encourage a support of the amendment.
Great, all right. Co-Chair Igo moves the A1 amendment. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? The motion prevails and the amendment is adopted. All right, Chair Howard, to your bill as amended.
Thank you, members. This bill is directly responsive to the presentation we just heard. We have supportive housing providers all across the state that are doing incredible work to keep Minnesotans out of homelessness and ensure that they have safe, stable homes. And I'll be even a little more blunt than our presenters. We are facing a potential 5-alarm disaster of our supportive housing providers. And if they are to lose the kinds of funding that is being contemplated by potential losses in the federal government, many will struggle to stay open. If our supportive housing providers are not able to stay open, we will see huge increases of people that are experiencing homelessness in the state of Minnesota and not have the systems in place to care for folks. And this just would be not only would this be a disaster for those Minnesotans and our state as a whole, it's just so unnecessary given that these housing providers are providing such incredible housing and opportunities for these people. As presenters mentioned, this is a model of housing that we've seen to work, to have great success at preventing homelessness and providing pathways out of homelessness. And it's serving a population that requires the kind of service they're getting from these supportive housing providers. Second, I would note, as it was noted in part of the presentation, these are providers operating all across the state of Minnesota. And so the funding that's at risk puts those providers at risk all across the state. I would note, in particular, in greater Minnesota, supportive housing providers across the state access resources in a number of ways. And to be clear, the loss of the federal funding would be devastating everywhere. But in particular in greater Minnesota, many of these supportive housing providers get the lion's share or almost all of their funding through these federal resources. If those dollars go away, there is not just some solve for that gap. And in a lot of these communities, as I'm sure members on this committee can attest, there isn't another place for these folks to go. These are the trusted supportive housing providers in our communities all across the state. And so it's vital that we have our eyes wide open to this challenge and do what we can in our seats here in the state legislature to make sure we stave off this crisis. So that brings us to this bill, House File 3425. We are, in this bill, directing $9 million in grants to be utilized to help ensure that those continuum of care housing grantees have the resources they need to keep their doors open, literally, through this calendar year and beyond, to make sure that we're have a safeguard in place that, if not, threatens the stability of housing for thousands of Minnesotans. I would note that this comes at a net zero cost to the state budget because we're utilizing a program that we passed in 2023, the Strengthen the Supportive Housing Model. That's a program for a very similar purpose that was created to support supportive housing providers. This is providing a little more direction in that program, but we're not appropriating new dollars. So it's an elegant way for us to address a looming crisis and do so while staying net zero on the bottom line. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions and may phone a friend with some of our excellent experts as well who can speak more eloquently than I about the value of these programs and how much they're at risk.
Thank you, Chair Howard, and we love a net zero impact of the state budget. So next we'll move to your testifiers. Looks like you have 3 on the list here, starting with Ben Helvig Anderson with Beacon Interfaith, and as well as Carla Henderson with Project for Pride and Living on deck. So your 2 minutes begins. Welcome to the committee whenever you're ready to start.
Thank you, Chair Kozlowski, Chair Igo, Chair Howard, and committee members. My name is Ben Helvig Anderson, Vice President of Policy and Organizing at Beacon Interfaith Housing Collaborative. Beacon is a nonprofit provider and a collaborative of congregations with 24 buildings serving over 1,200 residents, and we are one of the largest single holders of site-based supportive housing units in the state. For over 2 decades, across both Democratic and Republican administrations, we have built in Minnesota a fragile but effective supportive housing system because it works. Supportive housing, which is subsidized homes paired with services, is a proven solution to homelessness. Changes to the primary federal funding for supportive housing, the continuum of care, which we just heard about, have created a massive funding gap in a fragile system. The stability of thousands of Minnesotans' homes, including 400 Beacon residents, is in jeopardy. An example of these homes is Vista 44 in Hopkins, where 50 families live, all who have recently transitioned out of homelessness. Before moving in, those kids at Vista often left school unsure of where they would sleep that night. Today, they have a safe home and a parent who can finally breathe and move their life forward. This is all at risk. Supportive housing is the invisible backbone to our statewide homelessness response system. Without your leadership, it is in jeopardy. We are grateful for Chair Howard, Chair Igo, and all the committee members here today and your leadership. This bill is a critical first step to sustain the gain. This is a stopgap we need while we work on long-term funding solutions this session. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And next up, we have Carla Henderson and on deck, Randy Wickham. I'll just note that that testimony will be virtual. Please begin whenever you're ready.
Good afternoon, Chair Howard, Chair Igo, and members of the committee. My name is Carla Henderson, and I am the CEO at Project for Pride and Living, a nonprofit affordable housing operator and service provider with 1,800 units and homes in the Twin Cities. For more than 50 years, PPL has partnered with Minnesota families to ensure that they have both a secure place to live and a path to thrive. For households exiting homelessness and entering supportive housing programs, access to strong, reliable, and fully funded case management services are essential to help enable long-term stability. We know permanent supportive housing works. At PPL, over 90% achieve 24-month housing stability. And we also know it is one of the most cost-effective tools we have to prevent and end homelessness. Supportive housing is currently held together by piecemeal funding, where services rely on a patchwork of unpredicted federal, state, local, and philanthropic dollars. Federal continuum of care funding, which at PPL totals $1.9 million annually, or 30% of our supportive housing budget, is a crucial part of that patchwork. Without adequate funding, essential services fall away, and without services, families are much more likely to lose their homes and fall back into homelessness, at a significant cost to the public and taxpayers. The $9 million in already appropriated funds included in HF 3425 remain unspent, and we urgently need flexibility to use those dollars now due to jeopardized federal COC funding. We cannot afford to lose a single dollar in our fragile housing stability system. The consequences will be felt by families statewide. People will lose their homes. Our ask is simple and urgent. Now is the time to deliver these critical funds to stabilize supportive housing and protect families from losing the stability they've worked so hard to achieve. Thank you for your leadership and consideration.
Perfect timing. Thank you so much for being here. And our last testifier will move to Randy Wickham, joining from the Minnesota Coalition of Homeless. And again, this will be a virtual testimony. And is Randy with us?
I am.
Great. Begin whenever you're ready. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairs Howard and Igo and members of the Housing, Finance, and Policy Committee. My name is Randy Wickham. I'm the Executive Director of the Lived Experience Advocacy Network, also known as LEAN. I'm a fellow for the Minnesota Coalition for the Homeless, a board member for the Central Minnesota Continuum of Care. I work at my local emergency shelter, and I work closely with the local community leaders and decision makers to make sure that the needs and voices of our most vulnerable populations are being heard. Before having support services, my life was very similar to the vulnerable populations I work with today. I was struggling with addiction. I survived domestic abuse and human trafficking, compounded with physical and mental health issues, all while being a mother. My physical and mental health challenges made it very hard for me to find and maintain housing while juggling all the things it takes to be a productive member of society. I knew I had a purpose. I didn't know what it was or what a future looked like because I was just surviving. Without the skills or supports needed to maintain a home, I lost my housing and ended up on the streets. Excuse me. I have housing and maintain a job because I received the proper services, which included a team that helped me navigate the many hurdles and roadblocks that life has put in front of me and the ones I put in front of myself. Working with supportive housing team has given me a safe place to live and a safe place to unpack and work on the trauma and pain I've carried most of my life. The best part is that no one did it for me. They supported me as I discovered the tools needed to utilize the skills I had within myself to build a real life where I'm happy, healthy, and stable. Because of supportive housing, I found my purpose. I'm a leader and trusted advocate in my local and statewide communities, and without those supports, I would not be here today to share my story with you and hopefully inspire others to do the same. It is very important that we maintain supportive housing, and we have in Minnesota because it works, and I'm a testament to that. It strengthens our communities, it saves money, and it saves lives. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, and for all of our testifiers. Next, we'll move to member discussion. Any members have discussion for this bill? All right. Seeing none, I'll move over to Co-Chair Igo.
Thank you, Chair Kozlowski, and thank you, Chair Howard, for bringing the bill in front of us today. You know, when this issue first came up, I was taking meetings and calls kind of all through the fall and being educated on it, learning about it, but I also had some experience with it and know the importance of it. So I can't remember if I've told this story in committee before, but I thought it'd be a perfect day to tell it. When I represented the city of Grand Rapids before redistricting, I did a ride along with the local PD, and just to kind of learn about how things went. And it was a really slow night. I'm like, okay, there's really nothing that happens. I guess that's a good thing, right? Towards the end of the night, the local police officer I was with, we got a call that there was a disturbance down at one of the local boat landings. We went down there and were met with the county sheriff. There was someone who was going through a mental health crisis and was trying to drown themselves in the Mississippi River. I found myself being with the police officer and the sheriff's department trying to drag this woman out of the water and save her life and then bring her to the local hospital. But the reason I tell this story is that when we got to the hospital, everyone in the ER knew her name. Everyone in the sheriff's department knew who this was. Everyone at the local PD knew who this was. Why? Because she continually has mental health crises. So why do I tell this story? Because it's important when we're talking about continuum of care and continuum of services. Because without facilities like this person is back out on the street and is in harm's way once again. So this bill in front of us is good in a lot of ways because we found money that we're able to move around and help in a time when it's needed, right? And not only do we need to support these places all across the state of Minnesota, from districts like mine to right here in the Twin Cities, but we need to make sure to shore them up, because when we don't take care of people, it can get even worse, and worse things can happen. So I tell that story because it really ties home just how important this issue really is. So I want to thank all the providers out there that do this good work and do it in a way in good collaboration with our federal partners and our state partners, but most importantly, our communities and taking care of our most vulnerable. Because that's what we all believe in, whether we're Republicans, whether we're Democrats, we take care of people. So with that too, I also want to thank my Congressman, Pete Stauber, who, when this also happened, was one of the 22 Republicans to make sure and send a letter to HUD asking for this to be extended and asking for changes, because he definitely saw this issue himself, being a local police officer in the city of Duluth. So I'm confident that we're going to keep working as a statewide delegation, but also a federal delegation and partnership to hopefully get this fixed done at HUD and do the education that's needed so that these services that provide good things to our community and keep them safe can be fixed and put right. But in the meantime, it's good today that we have this bill in front of us, so I want to thank you, Co-Chair Howard, for bringing this bill together. I just actually signed on to the bill, so I'll be helping getting it forward and getting it done. And thank you once again. I look forward to hopefully passing it out of committee today.
Thank you, Co-Chair Igo, and we'll move over to Representative Momani Hiltzy.
Thank you, Chair. I think I'm breaking protocol for going after the co-chair, so sorry I didn't raise my hand earlier, but I wanted to, first of all, acknowledge the work that you've put into this, so thank you so much, Chair, for the work for this bill. And I am speaking up in support of this bill because this bill is not just a housing bill, it is a bill that is, touches on stability, touches on safety, touches on, dignity of an individual, right? So supportive housing works because it meets people where they are, like Chair Igo talked about. It pairs safety, stability, housing with services individuals need to address mental health challenges, substance addiction, disability, and long-term homelessness. So when we talk about investing in supportive housing providers, we're investing in fewer emergency rooms, right? Room visits, fewer jail bookings, fewer shelter stays, and more stability, employment, and community connection. So with that, if we are serious about reducing homelessness and building safer, stronger communities, then we must fund this specific bill and the initiatives that goes into this. We must acknowledge that the work that the the supportive housing providers are doing, because it matters. So this House File 3425 is not charity, it is smart, it is responsible, and it is evidence-based policy that works. So I'm super excited about this bill, and thank you so much for carrying it.
Thank you, Representative, and I'll just use a quick second of Chair's discretion to say also thank you to our co-chairs and to you, Chair Howard, for your leadership, along with our providers, our COC providers, our tribal nations, counties. They're really the backbone of our homelessness response system, and without these dollars, we know that, our community members, our neighbors, as you mentioned, they don't come in pieces, but our funding and our systems do. So thank you for making sure that we have a backstop to this. And I'll move it over to you for any final comments.
I'll be very brief because the comments of the members, Co-Chair Igo, your comments are a great close for the bill. I mean, it just speaks to how life-changing, life-necessary the work that our supportive housing providers do, and it's really meaningful, I think, to those providers to see that strength from this whole housing committee. So I thank everyone on the housing committee for the discussion today and their support of moving this bill forward. And again, echo my thanks to our providers who all across the state are doing their work. And so it's gratifying that we're able to move this bill with support. And we know that it's just the first step in our work, but it's an important one. And so I encourage a yes vote to move this bill forward along the process.
Great, and with that, Chair Howard renews the motion that HF 3425 is amended, be referred to the Committee on Ways and Means. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion prevails, and HF 3425 as amended is referred to the Committee on Ways and Means.
Second on the agenda today is picking up where we left off last week with House File 3424, Representative Agbaje's bill. Members, you remember we had some discussion and or a bill presentation and some testimony. We did have a few additional members sign up to testify, so we will take a few pieces of testimony. And we also did not get to adopting, we did adopt, okay. We did adopt an A1 amendment, so just want to remind folks that we have the bill that's amended before us. So what we'll do is we'll hear testifiers, reminder, 2 minutes for testimony, and then we'll move on to member discussion on the bill. And so first up, we have Suad Hirsi, member of CARE Minnesota, to testify. Oh, sorry, we have Swad's not able to attend. Next, we have Habibo Elmi, member of CARE Minnesota. And I understand we have a translator as well. So if you could identify your name for the record as well, and we're happy to hear your testimony.
Good afternoon. My name is Ismail. I'm the Director of the Community Safety at CARE Minnesota.
magacaygu waa xabiibo waa insaamaya waxaan ahay maxaan idhahdaa
Welcome to the committee.
She said, my name is Habiba Elmi, and good afternoon, everyone.
Please proceed with your testimony.
My name is Ismail again. I'm translating the testimony of Habiba Elmi. Dear Chair and committee members, my name is Habiba Elmi. I am testifying for HF 3424. I'm a mother raising my children. I'm here today because I'm worried about my eviction case and what is happening to my families in our state. I was told that I own $4,133. I do not believe that amount is correct. I felt that the process was not fair, that there was not a clear proof. Because of this, my children and I could lose our home. This was cost me a lot of stress and worry. I'm not the only one. Many families in our state are going through the same problem. If they cannot pay this money, they might also lose their home. Families are scared. This needs to stop. You have the power to protect families and make sure landlords treat our families fairly. If this bill passes, it will help not only me, but many families across Minnesota. Please stand with families like mine. Please protect our right. Make sure no family loses their home unfairly. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for sharing your testimony. Next, we have Salma Isa, a tenant organizer with Acer. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you. To the members of the Housing, Finance, and Policy Committee, my name is Salma Isa, and I represent Acer, African Career Education and Resource, Inc. We strongly urge to pass HF 3424 to extend Minnesota's pre-eviction notice from 14 days to 30 days. In the last 30 days alone, Acer has received 138 rental assistance requests, which is nearly 14 times our normal monthly volume. As a tenant organizer, I spend many hours talking to families on the verge of eviction, watching the clock tick, not knowing where they will go next, and right now, 14 days is simply not enough time for families to stabilize after a sudden loss of income, especially in the current climate of increased ICE enforcement. Let me share one story. A mother of 4 came to us in a crisis. She had just given birth to her 4th baby 1 month earlier. During delivery, she nearly lost her life due to internal bleeding, and she required emergency surgery the day after she gave birth. And now, medically, she's unable to work while recovering. Her father stepped in to become the sole provider for her and her children, but a few weeks ago, he was taken by ICE. With no income, she fell behind on rent and received a 14-day eviction notice. It took her 30 days just to navigate assistance programs before finding us. It took us, Acer, another 15 days to process her paperwork and payment coordination. This is 45 days to stabilize her housing. But under current law, she had only 14 days before eviction proceedings could begin. This gap between the legal timeline and the real timeline families need makes eviction not just possible, but highly likely. A 30-day notice does not prevent landlords from being paid. It gives families a fair and realistic window to seek assistance, negotiate payment plans, or access legal help before entering courts. Preventing eviction is far less costly than responding to homelessness after displacement. The human and physical consequences of inaction are too high. We urge you to pass HF 3424. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you. And last, we have Samantha Diaz-Powell, Deputy Chief of Staff with SEIU Local 26. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. My name is Samantha Diaz-Powell. I am the Deputy Chief of Staff for SEIU Local 26. We represent over 8,000 janitors, security officers, airport passenger service workers across Minnesota. On this bill, I am also authorized to speak on behalf of UFCW 663. So that's 14,000 meatpacking, retail, food production, healthcare, and other essential workers across our state. Right now, many of these workers and thousands of Minnesota families are in despair. All they want to do is work. All they want to do is provide for their families. All they want to do is pay their rent. All they want to do is live without fear. But instead, Minnesotans, working Minnesotan families, many with the quote-unquote legal work authorization be here, have seen neighbors detained, family members taken, household income disappearing overnight. Even those who are authorized to work are cutting hours or staying home out of fear, worried about what happens to their children if a parent is taken. So when that income is disrupted, the rent does not stop. If evictions accelerate in this environment, the consequences will ripple far beyond the individual families. An eviction crisis will destabilize neighborhoods, hurt small businesses that rely on workers, and weaken that workforce and tax base our economy depends on. So the recovery from the indiscriminate federal attacks will take a lot of time and a lot of resources, and we should not lose the chance in preventing the damage to deepen. That is why we support extending the pre-eviction bill. Thank you for your leadership, Representative, on this. It is reasonable and is a measured response to the crisis that we are in. It gives the families time to regain their footing, allows our workers and communities to stabilize, and help prevent this moment of crisis from becoming a permanent economic scar on our state. And so our members are not asking, this is not special treatment. We are just asking for the chance to work and to recover and to remain in our homes. Thank you.
Thank you. That's the last member that's signed up to testify. Before we go to member discussion, I want to just restate the motion to make sure folks know what motion is before us, and that is that this bill, as amended, be re-referred to the Committee on Judiciary, Finance, and Civil Law. Representative Hussein.
Thank you, Representative Agbaje, for bringing this bill forward, and thanks for all the testifiers who came out to share your stories. And my office, since I got elected, I got majority of the email is eviction. Some people that don't understand, some people that getting short of income, not a language barrier. They send in emails and letters that people do not even know how to read. I wish they could have translate. I wish they could have a translator. They don't even know what they're signing up sometimes. This will prevent and will give an opportunity for those people to seek legal opportunity, to seek and to see the help that they need. So I am in support of this bill. And a lot of my time it takes from my office is like evictions. The calls that I'm getting, it's on my pipeline. Sometimes some of the landlords, I'm very disappointed. They don't have a translators. I become the legislator and the translator to help for those people, make sure they understand their rights, make sure they know, what is the consequence. So I am in this support, and I would like to call a roll call for this bill.
Representative Hussein has requested a roll call, so we'll do a roll call on this bill. Representative Nash.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Agbaje, you know that we have a fundamental difference of opinion on how this is going to roll out based on past discussions around this very issue. But, I think in many ways this bill presupposes that landlords also don't suffer cash flow problems, because that's really what this is creating, is that if a person, much like I've shared in the past, my best friend in the world and his wife had rental properties during COVID, eviction moratorium went on, very often payments were not received. That, in addition to other things, was part of their retirement that they now have not recouped because of non-payment. So the presupposition that this is all landlords are cash flush and doing just fine and don't rely on rents coming in a timely manner, I think is a faulty piece of logic. And I just think that this is such an outlier. Nationally, this is not the standard. I think DC has something similar to this, but the average in the US is much shorter. This would make Minnesota a statistical outlier. And I'm just trying to figure out, when are we going to have an honest discussion about the impacts of a decision such as this on the people who own the underlying property, like a private landowner or a private landlord? Nowhere in this is, in my estimation, a consideration of how this will impact them. Because once again, I know a fair number of people who own rental properties. They rely on that. That is oftentimes their own income. So we're effectively now advocating to interrupt their income, which then puts them in peril as well. So I certainly understand the intent of this, but I think that we're not looking at the totality of the equation that you're offering just a small solution for. So I can't vote for this. This is not something that I think is fair. This is not fair because, once again, ask anybody who knows people who own rental properties. A lot of them actually do this as their form of income, and this is a huge interruption of how they make their living. Thank you.
Representative Agbaje, did anything?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Nash, for your comments. I think the only thing I agree with is the fact that we disagree on this. So, yes. I have talked to different landlords. Most landlords actually do want to help and support their tenants. They actually do want their tenants to find the money to be able to make the landlords whole. Actually, in fact, a policy like this actually goes further to ensure that more landlords end up whole, because what we are seeing is we know that it takes more than 14 days. In fact, it oftentimes does take close to a month to be able to secure funding, whether from a government office or from an NGO or from a church. What we've also been seeing in particular, if we want to relate it to what's been happening since December, is that neighbors are stepping up to help their other neighbors, which is great, but oftentimes in order to crowd fundraise that money, it does take time. My community, we have raised, I think, almost close to $100,000. We've helped more than 40 families, but that's not immediate. We need the time to be able to help those people to make sure that they're making the rent on time. I mean, I think the other thing to keep in mind is that this is just the time period before you can file an eviction. Already in Hennepin County, we have two standards. We have a 14-day standard, which is the statewide standard, and we also have some localities within Hennepin County have 30 days. So landlords are already having to be in a 30-day notice period already. I think this actually helps uniform the standard that we have across the state, so that way everyone knows what the rules are and they don't have to go back and check depending on what locality that they're in. And finally, I would just say that at the end of the day, most of these policies actually help the landlords that are doing the right thing. They know what the rules are, they understand what the game is, they understand how they can help their tenants and how they can even help their tenants find resources, which I've actually been heartened to hear that a lot of landlords have actually been stepping up to help their tenants find such resources. So again, I know we fundamentally disagree, but I would say that this is a standardization of policy that we can do here in Minnesota and follow along with 13 other states that have also done similar things.
Representative Nash, follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be brief. You said that many landlords know what the game is, except that it's not a game. It's their livelihood. And that's an incontrovertible fact, that people who own these rental properties, very many of them, like my friend, that's how they're making their living. And then you said something that really stuck out to me, and then I'll close. You said many or most landlords will work with people who find themselves in this position, and that's great. However, it should not be prescriptive. If they're going to be able to do that, then that means that they have the margin to do that, and they can enter into that agreement, but for many of them, they require the prescription of what we have today. And now you're forcing them, or you're attempting to force them, into some very different paradigm, hence my no vote. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Mamami Hillsley.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, Chair. Thank you, Representative Agbaje, for bringing this bill up. My comments are gonna be based from the perspective of tenants, and specifically for organizations who are out here, working with very limited resources to support the community, especially with the current realities that we're in. So I wanted to just quickly give a shout out to Acer, that has been working in the Brooklands corridor. Out of the 180 plus calls that they've received this last couple of weeks here, some of them are from me, coming from my office, because I've gotten members from my community reaching out. And so I just wanted to give a shout out to Acer. And so from a tenant perspective, I really want to appreciate organizations that are out here working on their behalf. And this is our way of making it easier for you guys in terms of providing you guys with additional support, additional flexibility to work with, folks who are just really trying really hard to do the right thing. And so I just wanted to, just say that, this is our way of also making it a little bit easier for you guys to help folks who really need it. Thanks.
Co-Chair Ago.
Thank you, Co-Chair Howard. So, and thank you to colleagues on both sides of the aisle for the discussion we've had on this bill. I guess I just want to start. It's a hard time to be a legislator right now at our Capitol. There's a lot of different issues going on. So I want to thank the testifiers, thank all members for the discussion we're having today. Also want to thank you, Co-Chair Howard. You and I have had a lot of conversation about this, over the last couple of months in phone calls and text messages. So it's been helpful to me to learn about things and hear about what's going on outside my district and in the state. That all being said, why it's also a hard time to be a legislator is you have to think about how our decisions we make today at this table affect greatly future generations of Minnesota and what this state could look like. So when we talk about creating policy that's going to move that eviction moratorium to 30 days, on paper and for the now, it sounds really, really good. But when you think about how it's going to affect our home providers, like Representative Nash was talking about, but also you think about, it goes back to a presentation we had today from MHP. This state is really struggling to attract the equity to build multifamily homes, to build just any home in general, because we have really policy that is very diverse and way more far-stretching than really anywhere else in the country. And really, in fact, if this was to be enacted by our state legislature, we would be the only state in the nation, besides Washington, D.C., that has a 30-day eviction moratorium. That's concerning. And we can't be creating policy that's going to make it harder for us to accomplish the goal that I know all of us on both sides of the aisle share, which is building more homes, making sure we have those homes. So when you pause to think about what these decisions are we're going to make, that's why I can't support this today. Now, I think we heard some great stories, and I believe when Mr. Smith was testifying last week, he even told a story about how his comment was landlords are the unsung heroes of what's going on right now because of how well they're working together. And I think that's what makes Minnesota so great, is that we don't necessarily need a mandate or a law to do what's right, to be Minnesota nice. So that all being said, I hear the concern. I have empathy for the situation, and I thank my colleagues and for the testifiers for telling their story. But when we think about the future of the state and what this sets for precedent for the future development of homes in this state, we cannot support this, and we cannot put another mandate on our home providers out there to hamper growth and to hamper the opportunities that we need when we need more housing now more than ever. So with that, I'll be a no on the bill today, and thank you for the time.
I'll just make a few comments before going to Representative Agbaje for a close. I would encourage members to vote yes on this bill. I want to reflect on a couple things. One, we had a robust conversation about a pre-eviction notice when we passed this bill in 2023, and heard lots of stories about the devastating impacts that would come. And frankly, I would say the sky hasn't fallen in way of this policy. And as the testifiers mentioned, we have many municipalities that currently have a 30-day pre-eviction notice. In some of those areas, like in Minneapolis, because of some of their pro-housing supply policies, they've seen gains in our supply. And so, but what this bill ultimately does is just provide a little more time for renters to be able to find assistance that pays the landlord to create that win-win, where people can stay safe, stay in their home, and to prevent that eviction before it comes. And that's how things have been playing out in our current 14-day pre-eviction notice. It's how things are playing out in the municipalities that have enacted a 30-day. I would note that there's many cities actively pursuing these policies. You know, my city's in Richfield is actively looking at a 30-day notice. Others are the same. I think you might see some cities look to maybe go higher, right? And part of that is, I think, at the local level, and what Minnesotans are saying at the local level is we want to see something more from the legislature, from the state, to provide that little space. And so I would argue that this is a way to create some uniformity across the state to provide a little more assurances and a little more time for renters. And the crisis we've been over the last 3 months relates to Operation Metro Surge has put a spotlight of why this is so important and so needed. But, you know, we had a housing and eviction crisis before Operation Metro Surge. And so, you know, I think this is sound policy to address the ongoing permanent issues we're having related to housing and the crisis we're in, just as it makes it more important than ever to move it forward. So I support the bill. I'll go to Representative Agbaje for any final comments.
Yes, thank you, committee, for your time. You know, I will just say that, you know, I've heard a lot about how Minnesotans help each other, and yet, unfortunately, this bill is another situation where it seems like we're not going to help Minnesotans, and that is unfortunate. I would also say that this bill is also one of those bills that actually does support businesses, too. It helps better understand what the playing field looks like. It helps better set the rules. And it also helps mirror the rules, because right now a lot of tenants actually have to provide anywhere from a 30 to 60-day notice in many cases if they're going to exit their lease. And so I think it just gives parity in the situation. But I am heartened by the fact that there are folks who are still continuing to advocate for a 30-day notice, and it's probably coming to a city near you. And so hopefully this will see you again. Thank you.
So with that, there is a motion for roll call. And so the motion before us is to pass or to send this bill as amended to the Committee on Judiciary, Finance, and Civil Law. And Mr. Smith will take the roll.
Co-Chair Howard?
Aye.
Howard votes aye. Co-Chair Igo?
No.
Igo votes nay. Vice Co-Chair Kozlowski?
Yes.
Kozlowski votes aye. Vice Co-Chair Dotseth? No. Dotseth votes nay. Representative Buck?
Yeah.
Representative Buck votes aye. Representative Hussein?
Aye.
Hussein votes aye. Representative Johnson?
No.
Johnson votes no. Representative Meckland?
No.
Meckland votes no. Representative Wamani Hiltsley?
Wamani Hiltsley, aye.
Wamani Hiltsley votes aye. Representative Myers? Myers votes nay. Representative Nash?
No.
Nash votes nay. Representative Norris?
Aye.
Norris votes aye. Representative Rayrauer? Representative Scraba?
Nay.
Representative Scraba votes nay. Representative Rayrauer?
With 6 ayes and 7 nays, the motion does not prevail. And with that, or for those in attendance, I would just, as a matter of process, the bill does not move out of this committee. That does not prevent further action on that bill within this committee. Next up is Bill number 3, House File 1385, Representative Kozlowski. Vice Chair Kozlowski, this is the final bill on the agenda. Would you care to move your bill before the committee?
So moved.
The bill is properly before the committee, and we'll be hearing this bill and laying it over for possible inclusion. I do understand you have an A1 amendment. Could you briefly describe it?
Yes, thank you, Chair Howard, and I do have, I believe it's the DE1 amendment.
Or the DE1,
And it's
excuse me.
a one-time appropriation of $1 million for the fiscal year 2027. That would be through MHFA for a statewide tenant education hotline, and that's just pairing the need with the problem with the solution for statewide resources.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Oh, sorry. I honestly, sorry, didn't see you, Representative Nash.
About DEs, as you may have heard recently.
Okay. I will look for you a little more quickly, I guess. I know there's,
Appreciate that.
all right. So the DE1 is adopted. It's before us here.
All right. Thank you, co-chairs and members, for the opportunity to present HF 1385 again. This is the statewide tenant education hotline. Not referring this to Ways and Means, so we'll have a chance to look at the budget forecast. This bill will be laid over, but almost everybody knows somebody who is struggling with a rental dispute or navigating their tenant rights. And as we've heard in these committees and across our communities, everything from repairs going unresolved to rat infestations that are impacting physical and mental health, privacy rights and disputes with neighbors, landlords navigating abandoned units and lease breaks, to tenants facing the threat of skyrocketing evictions and what to do if one is filed against them. And thanks to our collective work in the committee, young renters to senior renters have more rights, including the right to organize and demand better living conditions. But there's still more work to do because we don't have adequate and centralized educational legal resources. And so this bill is a step in making sure that we have border-to-border resources so that neighbors don't fall through the cracks on their own. Neighbors like Angela from my community, who's a very hardworking nurse. She's a proud grandma in raising her grandkids and had reached out last winter in a big panic because her heat went out in her apartment. And she had to pay for hotel stays, deal with preventing, frozen pipes, bouncing around from friends' homes, not being able to reach the property manager for over 2 weeks and finally get that heat restored. I'll say that for me personally as a renter in Duluth and our communities, we have really old aging housing stock. I sure wish I had a hotline and a phone a friend to call. When I was renting, I lived in a basement in an apartment and it often flooded, and be standing in ankle deep water. And I remember going down in the basement and asking my roommates, hey, did somebody cook lasagna and leave it on the basement floor? And no, it was mold, and so that impacts asthma. That really has an impact on health conditions. And so we know that these things all mold, lasagna mold is silly. It does have major impacts on renters in Minnesota. And so everybody deserves to have a warm, friendly, responsive human on the other end of a phone. And these processes are really intimidating if you don't have an attorney, if you don't know who to talk to about your legal rights and what they even are, let alone how to resolve them. I'll also note that this bill would put us in line with states like Washington, Illinois, to New Jersey that already have state-backed and statewide tenant hotlines that provide these services. So without further ado, I'd like to move into testifiers. Today I have with me Eric Hauge with Homeline to describe what that could and look like here in Minnesota. Homeline providing free legal, organizing, and educational resources. You'll also hear from renters and city councilors across the state. I also want to just draw your attention to your packet that has letters of support, as well as Homeline's tenant hotline information with their impacts from 2025. So with that, I'll turn it over to talk about the need for this Homeline for housing stability for Minnesotans.
First up, we have Eric Hauge, co-director with Homeline. Our reminder testifiers, you'll have 2 minutes. Mr. Hauge, welcome to the committee.
Thank you, co-chairs and members of the committee. Appreciate it. My name is Eric Hauge, co-executive director of Homeline. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. For 34 years, Homeline has operated Minnesota's only free statewide tenant legal hotline Nearly 30% of Minnesota households, which is about 650,000 families, rent their homes. And when something goes wrong in that home, an eviction notice, heat that won't work, a landlord entering without notice, a deposit withheld, the law can be very complex and the stakes are high. For most renters, there's no attorney standing beside them, but they can call Homeline. Last year, as you see in your packet, we advised 20,241 renter households from all 87 counties. We've averaged more than 20,000 households annually for the past several years. This is the highest volume in our organization's history and a 50% increase compared to pre-pandemic levels. Operation Metro Surge has only made our services significantly more needed by our neighbors. In January, we advised over 2,000 households, the busiest single month in our 34-year history. We saw a 116% increase in inquiries, people asking for financial assistance to help pay rent compared to last January. We're hearing from families who have lost income suddenly and severely, folks that are afraid to leave their homes, households where a primary wage earner has been detained or deported, renters who are scared to go to court, fearful to ask for repairs, scared to assert basic privacy rights. Homeline is a low-cost, high-impact intervention that prevents homelessness before it happens. The vast majority of disputes we handle are resolved outside of court because tenants receive adequate legal information early. Our eviction prevention project alone, we have contacted more than 47,000 households facing eviction in just the past 2 years, proactively providing info and encouraging them to seek advice before a court date. We also provide public education across the state, including reaching over 7,800 attendees in just the last 2 years. And we speak to tenants, landlords, court staff, social workers, et cetera. Our state contract, just one second, our state contract has not meaningfully changed since 2013, but our client volume has doubled. So HF 1385 would allow us to retain experienced legal staff with competitive wages. More Minnesotans are renting than ever before. They deserve clear information, timely help, and a fair chance to stabilize their housing. Thank you for your time and consideration. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Next, we have Falcon Heights City Councilmember Paula Milkey. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you. Yes, I'm Paula Milkey. I serve on the Falcon Heights City Council, began serving in 2024. Falcon Heights is a first-ring suburb of St. Paul. We're home of the State Fair and the University of Minnesota St. Paul campus. Nearly 2/3 of our property is non-taxable. Our population is roughly 5,300, and 40% of our residents reside in rental properties. When I campaigned in 2023, I learned of all the different challenges our tenants face in their rental properties. And we have a very small city staff, and they don't always have the answers to tenants' questions. So we really value Homeline. We encourage our residents to contact Homeline for that expert advice. And importantly, Homeline has bilingual staff, which is a huge asset. During a hot stretch in August of 2024, central air conditioning stopped working in several units in one building. The windows in that building didn't open and temperatures reached the high 80s. Our city staff directed tenants to Homeline so they could learn about the Emergency Tenant Remedies Act. In 2024 and 2026, I worked with Homeline staff to conduct workshops to help our residents learn their rights as tenants. The sessions were in English and Somali. Our tenants had many questions, and sometimes the answer was the property manager has the right to do that. Other times the answer was, nope, that's not right. You need to document when that happens. Our residents, there's just so many fears of retaliation if they ask too many requests for repairs or just raise too many concerns. So I please ask you that you increase the funding for Homeline. It's a valuable and essential resource for tenants, small cities, and local officials like me. We rely on Homeline staff for their knowledge and their expertise.
Thank you. Lastly, we have Chloe Holloway, member of the Duluth Tenant Union. Welcome to the committee.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for having me here today. My name is Chloe. I'm a renter from Duluth and a proud member of Duluth Tenants. In June of 2024, my roommate put in a maintenance request for leaks that were starting to cause mold in our kitchen pantry. For the next 6 months, We would receive single-sentence emails once a month from our property manager informing us that they're working on it as the mold grew worse by the day. I was becoming increasingly worried for our health as I had started to feel sick, so I tried to clean the mold off the ceilings and walls. Each time I cleaned the pantry, I had to gear up with nitrile gloves, an N95 mask, and eye protection as the mold would literally fall onto my face. The whole time this was happening, we were sending emails almost weekly with photos showing the progression of the mold and begging for anything to be done. We were only told to be patient. The leak in our roof was finally fixed by the end of October. And I know I'm not alone in this experience. From July to November last year, while canvassing for Right to Repair, I knocked 3,000 doors across every neighborhood in Duluth and talked to hundreds of renters about mold, pests, broken locks, and so much more going unaddressed by their landlords. I've always felt confident in referring them to Homeline and that it's one of the best ways to ensure that they actually get the help that they need. I also want to acknowledge that Homeline is a resource for so many things beyond repairs. The legal system is incredibly intimidating and confusing. I probably could have taken my landlord to court, but I didn't because I would have been doing so myself, and that's scary. I've since learned that Homeline is a vital resource that makes court proceedings accessible for every tenant. Increased funding for Homeline would ensure that they have the resources to help many more renters with stories like mine. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a few minutes left, so we do have some time for member questions or discussion. Is there any members? If not, we'll go to Representative Kozlowski for close.
All right. Well, thank you so much. That was quick, and I always appreciate a quick bill to the point. But this is a bill that we've heard before for consideration, and just the stories that we've heard illuminated speak to the volume and the need for a statewide resource for tenants and landlords alike to be able to call, get the help that they need in a timely manner when they need it most. I'll just highlight, that 91% of the callers are low income, 45% extremely low income, and the top 3 calls were repairs, evictions, security deposits. For me, one of the things I'm incredibly proud and want to see us continue to invest in prevention is that Homeline prevented over 2,000 evictions last year alone. That means less expense, less anxiety, and less time for renters and landlords alike to feel like they have to just suck it up and figure it out on their own. This means more quality housing for all, stronger economy, families staying together, and appreciate your consideration for future funding.
Thank you, Representative Kozlowski. With that, this bill is laid over for possible inclusion. Members, that concludes our agenda today. We are adjourned.